Today we are doing a little field test of the Atomos Shogun Inferno with the Sony a7S Mark II. This external recorder doesn't only record your HDMI output, it also is a nice tool to expose your shots because it's a field monitor with 10-bit color depth, and it also has a 1500 nit display. If you compare it with other displays, most displays have 400 nits, and that's the brightness level. So this monitor is very bright, which is very good because then you can make high dynamic range visible on the field, which is awesome. We just came up here in the rain to show you how Atomos HDR works. As you can see here on the screen of the Sony, everything is too bright. And now we look at the Atomos Shogun again. The highlights are blown out and it's just showing what the HDMI out from the Sony is giving the Atomos Shogun. But when you start to turn Atomos HDR on, the highlights come back. And that's the advantage of Atomos HDR, because this monitor can display these color differences and these brightness differences. But for now, let's look at some of the features of the Inferno. In the waveform monitoring tab, we have the luminance waveform, RGB waveform, vector scope and vector scope zoom. You can also change the size of the waveform by pressing the 1/4, 1/3 or full screen icon. The brightness slider directly controls the intensity of the waveform, while the transparency slider adjusts the transparency values of the waveform display on screen. We also have the Monitoring Assist tab, which offers focus peaking with settings like Focus Assist in color, monochrome or edges only, and a slider where you can adjust the outline color also. A zoom mode which enables you to punch in and check critical focus with a 1:1 or 2:1 zoom. Zebra pattern where the threshold value can be adjusted by moving the slider left or right. False color and blue only exposure. It also offers cinema guides where you can toggle through the aspect ratios. You also have safe areas and an anamorphic de-squeeze function. While you record, you can enter the cut and tag menu. By pressing the favorite and reject icons, you can adjust a good clip or a bad clip. This information can then be imported into your editing software via XML file. You can also do that in playback mode, where you can review and tag your footage while viewing it. When you activate a button, it sets a start keyframe, and when you deactivate it, it sets the end keyframe. If you tap the audio bars, you bring up the audio panel. To adjust the gain on the analog input, you need to bring up the audio options page. You can only adjust the gain by tapping plus or minus, which sucks balls. We would definitely like to have a slider instead. And before you ask, yes, this device is also capable of providing phantom power also. The homepage audio tab changes the audio levels to vertical or horizontal, which is helpful if you have many audio inputs. Then there is the input panel. It is a command center for all the devices connected to the Inferno and will assist you with connectivity by indicating if the signal is active or if attention is required. You can change sources or set the recording trigger mode to timecode or HDMI, for example. If you need to name your files, there is a tab for that also. You can change the recording format in the Record Format tab. From the codec section, you can toggle between ProRes or Avid DNx HR. The quality menu allows you to toggle codec compression. There's also an indicator how long you can record with the selected codec. So the Atomos Shogun Inferno gives you a better codec, which is also great. They are much better than the compressed formats that we have in the Sony a7S Mark II. The battery screen indicator has 3 icons. 2 will display the batteries and the other one displays the DC input. The Shogun Inferno will automatically switch between connected power sources when the source in use is depleted. Last but not least, we have the Monitor Mode tab that features the Atom HDR function, which I explained earlier on. Whoa, Jan, hold on for a minute there. What is the difference between the Shogun Inferno and the Shogun Flame? Gosh darn it! The only difference between the Atomos Shogun Inferno and the Shogun Flame is that the Inferno records 4K 60p and in Full HD it records up to 240 frames per second. Besides the fewer SDI inputs and outputs, the Shogun Flame is just capable of recording 4K 30p and 120 frames per second in Full HD. So does it record 240 frames per second with the Sony a7S? We come to that later. Next up, let's take a look at handheld shooting, mounting and weight. If you have the strap on the Sony a7S, you could lay it around your neck. You put some tension against it and then you could hold it more steady. That's a little trick I do, but it's very top heavy. If you want to record audio also, then it gets complicated because then you would have to put your XLR breakout cable to the Atomos Shogun Inferno like this. And then you would have a microphone, for example, where on top, on the side, it's very hard to find a spot. You would have to mount it on top of that. And then you could mount something else on top of that and light on top of that. And it gets ridiculous. The Atomos Shogun is actually very heavy because of the batteries. If you wouldn't have those batteries, it's okay. It would be a heavy field viewer or monitor. We don't have a battery grip, but we would definitely buy one. If we have this setup, we would use a battery grip because you can hold your camera better that way and it's a little bit bigger and you have more battery life because the Sony a7S battery is not the best one. We know that. Because the Atomos Shogun Inferno has 2 batteries, it takes longer to decrease the batteries, but they run out pretty fast. That's why they implemented that they are hot swappable. If you want to change recording settings or settings like ISO or exposure, you would have to look at your Sony monitor. That's why you need to see both monitors, because we've experimented with mounting it backwards somehow that you can have it as a bigger display on the back. That wouldn't make it so top heavy, and that's a better setup to film like this. But the problem then would be that you can't see the Sony monitor. Something else, the mounting option. I can tell you the Hotshoe is not a good mounting option for a heavy recorder like the Atomos Shogun Inferno. The Sony a7S Mark II is very compact. That is a good thing. The bad thing is the Hotshoe is also a little bit shorter than normal Hotshoes. And that's a problem for mounting the Atomos Shogun because 10% is missing of the Hotshoe. That's 10% less fixation. That's not good. You need 100% fixation actually to mount it safe, but it works out a little bit, but it gets a little loose because of that. In our field test, we had a really bad screw that we had on top of that. It was a cheap one, that was the problem. This one is a little bit better, but still it gets a little wacky on top of that. It's not the best solution. Also, the heads of the sunhood screws are way too small to mount it properly. So I would recommend using the Atomos Shogun in that setup on a tripod. That's what I use. For handheld, it's nearly impossible. If the lens gets a little bit bigger, it's too heavy nearly to record steady. Because of all the disadvantages, the heavy weight, the strange handling issues, I would recommend you building up your own shoulder rig. That's what I recommend, and that's what we did. How about we just put everything together and look how it looks like? Especially when you're using a bigger lens, it has a lot of advantages. Let's just build it up, man. Here is our so-called Frankenstein rig, which has a lot of advantages. For example, it has a V-mount battery solution, which powers the whole system. It powers the Atomos Shogun, the a7S. It powers our remote follow focus system. It can power this little LED light eventually. This handle has a rec button which starts the recording, which is awesome because then you don't have to reach to the Atomos Shogun or the Sony to start the recording session. In this setup, the cameraman just focuses on framing the subject and then somebody else pulls focus and you don't have to. So that's how we would use it. The advantage of the setup is that the Shogun is much lighter this way and you can just put it aside or away how you like it. The disadvantage is that you need another person controlling the remote. But if you have another person controlling the remote, then you have freedom, which is awesome. You have to keep something in mind. When you are buying an external recorder, you're not only buying great picture quality, longer recording times, you are also buying weight. And the problem with weight is you have to handle this weight. So we wouldn't run around with the Shogun and the A7S for itself with the heavy batteries on the side and everything. It wouldn't make sense for us. I know some of you guys are just seeking for redemption. So you ask yourself, for example, wow, can the Atomos Shogun record 240 frames with the Sony a7S Mark II? No, it can't. No, the bottleneck would be the camera itself. So no, you can't record 240 frames per second. You can't record 120 frames per second. Can you record 60 frames per second in 4K? No, you can't do that either. If you read the Sony a7S Mark II specs online on their webpage, that nobody apparently does, you can clearly see that its maximum output is 4K UHD in 30p and in 1080p just 60 frames per second. And all of that with a chroma subsampling of 422 in 8-bit, instead of the internal subsampling of 420. Now it raises the question, why should I buy an Atomos Shogun Inferno, or is there alternatives on the market? I say yes, there are. So if you just want to enhance your Sony a7S Mark II, have better quality, have Atomos HDR, I would recommend you the Atomos Ninja Flame, for example, because it just has HDMI outputs and inputs, and that's everything you need for the Sony a7S Mark II, because it doesn't have SDI out or in. So if you want to make use of the whole potential of the Shogun Inferno, I would recommend a camera with a SDI port in that case, because in most cases, these cameras can output RAW even, and that's much better. So if you're the kind of person that says, I don't really need all this fancy Atom HDR stuff, I just want peaking, and I want external recording, and I want better image quality, then I would recommend you the Blackmagic Video Assist 4K. That's right. So if you're the kind of person that says, no, oh God, that's way too expensive, I just spent $3,000 on a camera body, but you still want peaking, zebras and a bigger screen, I would recommend you buying just an external monitor. That's way than enough. There are a lot of good monitors out there that just cost like $300 or something. So guys, this was it. This was the review of the Atomos Shogun Inferno together with the Sony a7S Mark II. I'm Jan from Kawasaki. Peace out.